Lacrosse community, my name's Ryan Berns. I'm the president of the Lacrosse Leadership Institute. It's our mission to empower all those that love lacrosse, to recognize the skills you gain from the sport, to ultimately live your best life possible. We're so excited for our guest today. Dr. Frederick Douglass Opie is an innovator, educator, speaker, author, and host of the Fred Opie Show. He is a Babson College professor of history, and his most recent book is Southern Food and Civil Rights, Feeding the Revolution. Opie played lacrosse at Syracuse University, and he was a U.S. national team selection. Fred, thank you so much for taking the time and being with us today. Can you please share a little bit of your story with our community and how you got involved in lacrosse in the first place?
Ryan, first of all, thank you for having me. How do I keep this story short? I think probably the best way to give you the thumbnail sketch of what happened with me is I'm from the Hudson Valley, New York. Grew up right outside New York City. If you were on the Metro North train, the commuter train heading north, you would be in my hometown in roughly 35 minutes. And my parents moved from a town called Ossining, New York, where Sing Sing prison is. My dad actually is a retired Sing Sing prison guard. So my parents moved from Ossining, which was a town where my mother grew up, and they went to the next town over, which was Croton on the Hudson. And in my mother's mind, she thought that I would have greater opportunity, better educational opportunities, and other opportunities by moving her three boys. I was the youngest of three. So we moved to Croton in the 1960s, probably the late 1960s. And Croton was one of the early adopters of the sport of lacrosse, thanks to the planting of the game by a guy named Elliott Stark. And the sport took off in my town. Very small town, small high school. When I went to high school at Croton Harmon High School, we had probably 100 kids in my graduating class. It was a very small school, yet we were one of the early adopters, as I said, of the game. So we were competing in lacrosse against some of the bigger schools, the AAA schools, AA schools, Yorktown High School, which has been a powerhouse in lacrosse. But I can also think about playing against White Plains High School, where actually the football player Art Monk, who like me played at Syracuse, played for the Washington Redskins, the Hall of Famer. But we were playing against some really big schools and holding our own, because as a town, the boys, which we only had boys lacrosse, they fell in love with the game. And so just like anybody else, when I got to, I think it was 8th grade, my physical education instructor, a guy named Don Daubeny, he introduced lacrosse as one of the, part of the curriculum in the physical education department. And I was introduced to it in 8th grade. And then that summer, in collaboration with the recreation department, Coach Daubeny ran a summer program. And that's when I started playing. I grew up, this is going to sound crazy to so many people, but yeah, this brother here played hockey and then started playing lacrosse. So very similar games in eye-hand coordination and use of a stick. But it was love at first stick for me, and just took off from there. In the words of Rob Wartzberger, who was a Maryland All-American, West Tennessee guy, just like him, I was a lacrosse rat. I just was always playing a game. I could hear my mother, God rest her soul, saying, "Put that ball down." So that was my situation, yeah.
Well, it sounds like it was a family affair, and really a big community effort as well, with everyone that you were surrounded with. And ultimately, I know that you've been given the opportunity to play at the national and international stage. Do you have a highlight of your entire lacrosse career? Or are there a few moments that really stick out to you?
Yeah, I would say, I was just talking to my daughter, who is a rising junior, and we were just talking about lacrosse and some of her friends in her school on her team that were accomplished a lot of awards. But I said to my daughter, I'll never forget jumping from, played JV my freshman year, JV my sophomore year. And like so many kids today, they're like my daughter was a sophomore, played varsity and didn't just sit on the sideline, she played. Nobody back then played varsity as a sophomore. The big deal, talk about a highlight, the big deal was when you played JV, season's over, the varsity makes it into the playoffs, and 3 or 4 of the top JV players were brought up to varsity just to watch, just be on the sideline, practice, get a game jersey. I mean, you were the man if you did that. Well, Fred wasn't the man. I didn't get that opportunity. So I was talking to my daughter about this huge jump going from my junior year. Once I did get on the varsity, yeah, I started, I played a lot. Didn't earn any honors whatsoever. As in the words of Gettysburg College coach Hank Jansick, I didn't make all across the street, never mind All-American. Then I go into my senior year and I make all county. And where I was from, that section, each section was given a certain amount of All-Americans. They were given 5 All-Americans to mine. I think we were section 1, if I believe. I think it was section 1. But in my section was Yorktown High School, which both my junior year and senior year, they made it to the New York State Championship. They made it all the way to the finals. And so each year they had all 5 All-Americans deservedly. So I earned all county honors in high school my senior year. That was huge. I was saying to my daughter, you know, there was all county and then there was All-American. I said, the fact that I went from a junior with nothing and then making all county and then knowing the next step up was All-American, but those 5 All-Americans with another school, I said, that was a highlight for me, making all county. And I didn't know if I could make it or not, but was delighted that it happened. Then I think the next thing in terms of highlights, I went to a community college called Herkimer County Community College, played for a Hall of Famer named Paul Wareham. And at Herkimer, I had the opportunity to get my grades up, which I desperately needed to do. And I earned a first-team All-American at the junior college, which typically gives you an opportunity then to be considered if you want to go on to the next level at whether it be Division III, Division I. So earning All-American, just having that title behind your name was a special moment for me. And then when I got to Syracuse, I think just the fact that I had an opportunity to be a scholarship athlete at Syracuse after they won their first national championship in 1983. And it was a Yorktown teammate that really helped open that door for me, a guy named Tim Nelson, who went to Coach Simmons and said, hey, we need some defensemen. This kid is going to be transferring either to Maryland or Delphi. Why don't we recruit him? I got on the radar at Syracuse, and I walk into Syracuse in the fall of 1983. They just won their first national championship, and I'm a scholarship athlete at Syracuse. That was a really special moment. I'd say after that, the next special moment was the decision to try out for the U.S. national team, but getting that invitation. And if I remember correctly, there were 300 people that got an invitation to try out for a team that was only going to keep 26 players. So getting that invitation itself, never mind making the team, but just getting the invitation that you could compete for a spot was something really special. And then once you get to those tryouts, you would go downstairs before the next session and they would put you on teams and you go down there to see who you're going to play with. And you're looking at the other defensemen on your team. You're going, oh my God. I mean, these are people that you grew up watching play or you heard about their career. Many of them defensemen of the year, All-Americans. At Syracuse, again, I didn't make all across the street. So for a lot of people, I was a long shot. But the opportunity to compete at the highest level with some of the best in the land and looking at the attack when you're going to play against in that session, you're going, oh my God, you know, just trying to keep your head all together. But for whatever reason, the way God wired me, I have always risen to the level of the competition. I've never been a person that I'd be nervous. Don't get me wrong. I'd be nervous, but I always felt as though if I'm playing against better people, I'm going to rise to the occasion. I'm going to do the best I can to hold my own. And I think it's been that way for me professionally since leaving lacrosse, you know, as a professor, as an academic. When it comes to publishing, when it comes to being an outstanding teacher, I don't care where another professor went to school. My philosophy is, just like in lacrosse, I'm going to outwork you. And I dare you to try to be better than me. I'm going to do my best to be the best I can.
Oh, I love that, Fred, because so many things pop up for me. For starters, the resiliency, going from not even all across the street, which I love, but ultimately
not an original statement, by the way.
I love that. It's so funny. But then being able to play at the arguably the highest level And this notion of you're going to outwork anyone. I think that's one of the big things I take away from lacrosse is what allows me to be successful. And we hear it time and time again. Do you think that's your biggest takeaway from lacrosse as a sport to your professional and family life? Or what are some of the key things that you take from lacrosse to what you're doing now?
Ryan, there are a lot of intangibles. It may sound like I'm plugging a book, but it's more the principles I learned in lacrosse are so integral to me the fact that I got an undergraduate degree from Syracuse with a kid who had a severe learning disability. I have ADHD, not a little bit, like on steroids, really, really serious stuff that not knowing back then, in the 1980s, 1970s, let's just be quite honest. Educators experimented with us. They didn't know what they were doing. At least in most people, if you look at what's available structure-wise for people who have a learning difference, it's night and day. So the fact that I stayed with it, went to college, graduated, it says something about the love I had for the game of lacrosse. And the only way you could play it was to be a student athlete in good standing. And it said something about what I learned about if you put in the work, if you put in the preparation, there's almost anything you can do. Quick, funny story, a dream I had just a couple of days ago. So those who don't know, I live in the metropolitan Boston area. Most former college athletes that I have talked to, no matter what your sport is, if you loved your sport, you're going to have this reoccurring dream in which your coach or the athletic department calls you up and says, you have another year eligibility, get your stuff together and let's go. We're heading off to the championship. And again, at Syracuse, for those who don't know, I'll brag and say I played in 2 national championships. Let me also brag and say I lost both of them. So the ideal that it was unfinished business is one of the reasons why I keep having that dream. So I've had that dream a lot, but this is the craziest one I just had this week, that Bill Belichick drafts me at my current age to go to training camp for the Patriots as a tight end. That's just not happening, folks, right? But I had this dream. And when I came out of the dream, the thought to me was, you can do this about anything you can in terms of preparation, hard work, if you have the talent and the ability. That is not going to happen with me. So there are some people who are not going to achieve their goal because their goal is not realistic. What I've learned through lacrosse is you can achieve your goal if you do the hard work, make the sacrifices, but it's got to be achievable. And you got to have people in your life that will give you the feedback and say, as I've said to my daughter, you know something, if we work together, if I push you and if you pull me as your dad to help you, there's probably no limit for you in terms of playing and being a student athlete. But if she didn't have the ability, and a lot of people are frustrated because they're trying to do something on the job that they don't have the ability to do, or something on the field. You got to have that honest assessment of yourself and somebody that you know who can be a mentor or coach and say, yeah, you have what it takes, or you really need to rethink about your goal. Now, I will also say to you all is that God bless his soul, my high school coach, when he heard I was going to Syracuse, and he said, so what are you going to do next year? And he didn't know yet. I said, I'm going to Syracuse. He looked me straight in the face and said, Syracuse, you'll never play there. And it wasn't said maliciously. So I have to say that to everybody. He just didn't have the vision. He didn't have the vision that I had. He didn't have the vision that Coach Simmons had, who made the decision to give me the scholarship. And as I've said to my daughter, I would say this to anybody out there, there's some things you want to do that you shouldn't be sharing with other people because they don't have the vision. And all they're going to be able to do is just say something out of their mouth that may make you think twice about what you're doing. Or it may attract a whole lot of haters who's going to make that goal a lot harder to accomplish.
Yeah, surrounding yourself with that community that is going to be uplifting and help you avoid that head trash, because so many times we can get in there and just start to make ourselves self-conscious, and that's not going to be productive for that vision that we have. But I think this is a great transition talking about leadership and the vision that great leaders have to identify what potential athletes have or employees have or kids have at the end of the day, how they can become the best versions of themselves. So I ask you, Fred, what does leadership mean to you?
Well, I am a disciple of Jesus Christ. And the first example I see from the scripture is that leaders are servant leaders. That if you have authority and you're in a leadership position, you are to use that to serve others. That's the very first thing. That may sound absolutely crazy in our current environment, but that's the example of leadership that I go by. That if you have power, if you have ability, you use that to make other people's lives better. I was having a conversation with somebody here locally about a really talented player in our area. And one of the things that this person said, and I agree 100%, if you are a leader or you're a talented person on your team, which often in our society, particularly when it comes to toxic masculinity, that we put people in leadership who are usually the best, which I don't think necessarily is the way you decide that. But if you are the best in your particular area, or if you're a leader, you should be using that to make other players better. I mean, to me, I always say, and this is, again, this is hard with a lot of kids going to showcases in lacrosse and other sports, trying to look good in front of coaches who possibly will give them opportunity in terms of admission and scholarship to go to their school. But I always tell kids, be Magic. And they go, huh? I go, be Magic Johnson. The dude is in the Hall of Fame because he spent his career making other people better, dishing the ball out to them, being unselfish. I mean, that to me absolutely is the example of a leader. And can't anybody who does some research on Magic Johnson, you can't tell me he wasn't a leader on every team that he was on. Even early in his days as a rookie with the Los Angeles Lakers, he quickly became a leader. I think making other people look good is an important part of leadership. I think the other part of leadership is that you take responsibility. If things don't go well, you don't start blaming on other people. If things don't go well, you take responsibility. If you're the leader, you're supposed to be preparing people that are underneath you. And if they fail, it's an example of, I didn't do a good enough job of preparing them for what we were going to do, whether it's a lacrosse game or an assignment in a class or an exam or an interview they're going on. I'm the one that's supposed to prepare them. And if I don't do that job, I'm not being a good leader. So there's a book by Jocko Willink, who is a former Navy SEAL, called Extreme Ownership. If you haven't read that book, you don't have to be a war hawk to get that book and learn. But the idea that extreme ownership, everything starts with you. You have to go check everything out. You know, if I'm coaching and the team's not going well, let me ask you, coach, do you got a practice plan, or are you just showing up at the field and just whatever the wind blows, we're going to do today? If you as a team didn't execute a particular area of the game, whether it's ground balls, whether it's clearing, whether it's running, well, it should be reflected in your practice plan the next time. It should be really clear. If my students are not getting the job done in the classroom the way I want the assignment, then before the next class, I got to have a lesson plan that reflects on working on these particular assignments. So leaders, you got to be the hardest worker there. Let me tell you something related to this. The best job in the world, in my opinion, when it comes to leadership as a coach, is the assistant coach. The assistant coach, what do we do? We're a good cop, right? Head coach is bad cop. Head coach got to deal with wacko parents. Head coach got to deal with administration paperwork. All I got to do is show up, warm up the goalies, keep everybody fired up, smile at everybody. I love that job. But people who go from the assistant coach to the head coach, you're really going to find out what leadership is, because that head coach is doing all this kind of stuff behind the scenes that you had no clue was going on.
And that's so big in terms of, I just go back to Jocko and that extreme ownership and accountability. Everything that we do is just boils down to us. And we can point our fingers all over the place, but at the end of the day, all the situations we find ourselves in, there's one constant, and that's we are there. So once I think we get to a place where we can take that ownership, that accountability, then we're able to start moving in the direction that we want. And for me, lacrosse is a great way to get that. That's where you get to be honest with yourself. If you're not stepping on the field, why is that? Maybe it's my stick skills. Maybe it's I don't have a good relationship with coach. Maybe this or that. But it all boils down to you, and you can get yourself on the field. And I appreciate you bringing that up, Fred, because I think it's so important. I also, though, want to piggyback on what you're talking about with your daughter and the fact that she has to have the skills. She has to take on these different personas and make sure that she is being like magic, or for other kids that you're speaking to, they're making other people look better. And that's a big part of leadership. What else are you telling the kids right now? Or what else are you telling your daughter when they're thinking about what their future looks like, going from a junior to her senior year and then hopefully college? What do those conversations look like?
Really, really great question, and very appropriate. Just over the last 24 hours, just really having a serious conversation about her and what does she want to do in the future. You know, two things is trying to get her to think about what does she want to do in terms of her career in the future. And I think as her dad and my wife as her mom, observing my daughter, observing my son, and helping them figure it out. And again, I mentioned this kind of this push-pull and a conversation I had with Coach Rob Wurzberger down in Florida, that it's got to be the parent pushing a bit to get the child to fulfill the potential that's on the inside of them. All right. But it's also got to be, you got to feel for the pull. Where is the child pulling in a direction that you, because you're so set and you're focused on this child's going to be this, instead of what is the child telling you about they're interested in? Let them do a lot of investigation. Let them do a lot of shadowing people in different fields so they can get a chance to see what they're interested in. You know, I remember when I believe it was probably around middle school, that I thought I still am a guy who spends a lot of time out in nature, love going on walks and nature trails, the whole thing. So I thought, wow, maybe a career as a forest ranger, somebody working in that field, would be something I would really enjoy. Well, I think it might have been 2 summers later, my mother was able to get me a job with an organization that was working on conservation in the parks in Westchester County where I lived. And we get picked up early in the morning and we went out and we had long pants on, boots, and we were maintaining trails and we were doing that kind of work. That was an excellent experience. It made it really clear to me what that particular life could have been like. And I knew right away that I didn't want to do it. It wasn't a passion for me. It wasn't. And what's a passion? If you're trying to figure out what you want to do, excuse me, or what your child wants to do, or what one of the kids who are on your team, they're trying to figure out their career, it's the thing that they do and love it, and they do it so long they forget all sense of time. They look up and go, oh my gosh, I gotta go to the next thing. They're so lost in that thing that they could probably do it for a living. You want that kind of a job, and you gotta watch your kids. Where do they spend their money? Where do they spend their time? What kind of music do they listen to? What kind of clothes do they buy? It really is over a period of time. Think about it. I am a professor of history in which I write or research books and I write books. If you were to go back in time to Croton Harmon High School, go even earlier than that, when I'm just a student in the town of Croton on the Hudson, I spent despite my learning differences and challenges, I spent a tremendous amount of time in the public library in Croton on the Hudson doing research on ice hockey books and lacrosse books. I want to know any and everything. I mean, a lot of time. And then an ordered amount of time. It should have been an indicator later in my life that you like research and writing. You like reading. You like the life of the mind. It was something that, in retrospect, I see. Look at your kid. Look at the players that you have in you. Look at the people that you teach. What do they naturally go towards? And I'm sure, Ryan, in your own life, if you probably stop and unpacked it, you would see that. I know it's to the point where, you know, my wife and a good friend of mine that grew up with me that know my life, they said, look, you really need to write about this stuff. So I actually wrote my memoir and I titled it, Start with Your Gift. What is the thing that you're gifted with? What is the thing you're passionate with? Before anybody starts in the discussion about going to college, stop and think, what are you passionate about? What are you gifted in? What particular areas? And what's the best place to go and sharpen and prepare that gift? And is there a mentor who has a similar gift that you do who's gone ahead of you and wants to lift as they climb. Ask that person, if you were starting over again, how would you prepare for this? Would you go to school doing this? What kind of school would you go to? If your kid is gifted with their hands, don't make the kid go to college and do something where they're working with their mind or sitting behind a desk. It's probably not going to be the best place for them. And I can tell you, a plumber comes to my house, he can be here for 15 minutes. I'm cutting a check for $200. So you're going to tell me that that's a bad occupation because it didn't come with a degree and a lot of student loans? I think you're nuts. That's an honorable profession that if that person could return phone calls and get there on time, they're going to be making 6 figures as a plumber, working for themselves.
Fred, so many great things again to unpack with that. Finding your passion, being able to be persistent with that, and your goals to create success for yourself. Having mentors to be able to follow their same path or get them to share how to be most successful there. And it's so different from person to person. So thank you so much for giving us that. And I know we're wrapping up on time, so I'd just like to ask, do you have any last thoughts on lacrosse or leadership or anything else you'd like to share with our community today?
I'm thinking about 2 interviews I did yesterday for my podcast and themes that came up. There are 2, I would say, that are real important related to lacrosse, but they also have parallels. Number 1 is the question, how do you get the green light? How do you get the green light from your coach? How do you get the green light in your career? What are the things that you got to do to get the green light? Well, one of them I can tell you right now is you got to consistently make good decisions in life. And if you're going to get ahead in life, no matter what your choice is, you got to consistently make good decisions. I didn't say you got to be perfect. I said consistently make good decisions. That's one thing. I think that you have to be respectful of the people around you. You may be the best at what you do in your company or on your team, but do you respect the people around you? Or are you just an arrogant SOB that nobody wants to work with? You know, nobody's going to be giving you the green light if you're not respected among your peers because you don't respect them. That's another thing. I'd say the other thing in terms of getting the green light is that you realize when you're not on. You don't try to force things. I can remember my senior year at Syracuse, we're playing against University of North Carolina, and I'm covering I'm one of the top midfielders for Carolina. Steve Martell. Steve, you're out there, shout out to you right now. And Steve, first time he gets the ball and he decides he's going to go to the goal, he shakes me and just goes by me. He might have scored. If he didn't score, it was enough that it was on film. It was going to be embarrassing. All right. He gets another time comes around, he gets the ball on offense, and he just shakes me. It's happened a couple of times. It happened enough time that I look over to Danny Pratt, who was also running defense as a Danny switch. I wasn't on. I didn't have his number. It wasn't, you don't sit there and have your ego get in your way and the team loses because you don't admit that you're just not equal to the task here. So I think getting the green light is real important that you understand when you're on and not on. The other thing I would say to you in terms of, Ryan, of thoughts I have that I've been thinking about this for a while is the art of playing off ball. And I think it's an art that people don't think. I think there's parallels on the field and there's parallels in your career. Some people are great when they have the ball. There's some people in their company when they got everybody's attention, they're great. But when they don't get all the attention, they're not very good. If they don't have the ball, they're not very good. You have to understand how to put yourself in space to help other people. Somebody in your team has the ball and they have a lot of pressure on them. You got to put yourself in a space where you can assist them. Same thing in your career. You see somebody in your job that's under a lot of pressure for whatever reason, go relieve the pressure. Think about the parallels are very clear. Another thing is off ball, move your feet. Never stand still. When you're receiving the ball, move your feet. When you're throwing the ball, move your feet constantly. Guess what? In your career, move. Move. Don't sit there and wait for things to happen. What do they say? There's the different kind of people. Folks who watch things happen, so folks who wonder what's happening, and the folks who make things happen. You've got to move your feet and make things happen on the field and in your career. And then probably the last one is timing. When you're off ball, the key to off ball is timing. It's knowing when to cut, knowing when to move, when to open up space, when to clear through. Same thing in your career. You got to understand timing. When is it the right time to consider another job? I always tell people the best time to look for another job is when you got one you love. Because when you interview when you're desperate, it is obvious to the person that's interviewing you. So timing is everything. Keep working really hard. The timing, maybe it's not time for you to score. So you just got to keep working. Same thing in your career. Keep working, keep working. If you do that, eventually it's going to pay off. So I think the parallels in getting the green light, the parallels of working off ball, it's an art. And if you watch the greatest of them all in the game of lacrosse, some of them don't even need to have the ball very long. They get goals and assists all the time. And you just don't see it happening because and let me tell you, as a defenseman, to cover somebody on offense that is constantly moving will drive you crazy. So I think those are the two parallels that people don't necessarily think about that I think are really important.
Oh, Fred, I'm so glad you brought that up because it's made me shift a little bit in terms of how I think about how lacrosse affects the real world. And I'm thinking about always making good choices, and that's off ball. It's when people aren't looking. What's your line of integrity? What do you know you should be doing? Again, it may not be perfect, but you should be working hard and doing what you expect when no one's looking, and that allows you to be an expert, or that lets you at least give it your best effort. So thank you so much, Fred, for all that you provided to us today. We're so excited to continue to stay connected with you and see what you ultimately continue to do.
Thank you, sir. My pleasure.